ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ Shri Sai Ram. I am starting the fifth video on the discourses of Satya Sai Baba that form the Brahma Vidya or Atam Vidya of Sri Satya Sai Baba Bhagwan. Om Sai Ram, sir. I start the discourse. Forbearance, the primary spiritual quality. Whatever thoughts you have, they will bring you the corresponding results. Whatever you are feeling will be reflected in your way of talking and acting. In the very first place, you must endeavor to purify your feelings. You have to make your love pure. To do so, you have to develop forbearance, which is a serene patience and self restraint under all circumstances. Give good to all, even to those who may want to harm you. There is nothing greater than having this quality of forbearance. Forbearance is equivalent to truth itself. Forbearance is the heart of righteousness. Forbearance is the very essence of the ancient wisdom. Forbearance is non-violence in practice. Forbearance is contentment, it is compassion. Truly, forbearance is everything in all the world. Only when you have developed patience and forbearance will you be able to obtain the Lord. Now, over minor insignificant things, you lose your temper and become ridden with tension. Anger and temper are dangerous. They can ruin your life. If you suffer from anger, you will not be able to achieve anything worthwhile. You will be looked upon with disgust and derision. You will lose your wealth. All the honors you have enjoyed will turn to ashes. Your anger will even separate you from those who are closest to you. Because of anger, people lose everything and their life becomes a waste. Therefore, in the Gita, Krishna taught the principle of love and the need to cultivate love to counter hatred, jealousy, anger, and all the other bad traits that cause so much harm to you. Love knows no hatred. Love is free from all selfishness. Love is far removed from anger. Love never takes, it knows only giving. Love is God. You can experience God through love alone. If you want God, you will have to develop this sacred quality of love. Only through love will you be able to experience Him who is love itself. If you want to see the moon, there is no need to use a candle or a torch light. The light of the moon is enough to see the moon. If you want to see God, you need only to immerse yourself in love. Fill yourself with love, and you will surely succeed in acquiring God. But as long as this love has not yet become clearly established, there is a need for spiritual practices such as the devotional singing, repetition of the name of God, and other forms of worship. Once pure love has developed, these spiritual practices are no longer necessary. Yet, even when the moon shines brightly, you will not be able to see it if your eyes are closed in the same way. If your eyes are still closed to the loving presence of God within you, and then go good actions, including the various spiritual exercises, will help open your eyes and clarify your vision so that you can see and enjoy the Lord. That is the import of Krishna's teaching in the Gita. Only when you listen to such great words and only when you understand them clearly and only when you practice them will you be able to reach your divine goal. Set aside at least 1 hour per day to study these teachings and incorporate them in all your daily activities. In so doing, you will be using your time wisely and will be sanctioning your life. The three stages on the spiritual path. Fill your heart with one pointed devotion, and God will reveal Himself within you. Then you will see him as true as he truly is. In time, you will merge with him and become one with him. Embodiment of love. There are three principal stages that you must follow on the spiritual path in order to reach your spiritual goal. They have been described in a number of different ways in the Gita. At the end of the 11th chapter, wherein Lord Krishna gives Arjuna the vision of his cosmic form, you will find the three stages presented as follows. First, you must know that God is here. Second, then you must have a direct vision of Him. Third, finally, you must merge with Him. These three steps will lead you to liberation. Know that God is here, then experience God directly. In the first step, you learn through the words of the scriptures or a teacher that God really exists. But merely knowing this truth does not give you unlimited joy. You discover that God is here, but you also realize that you and God are separate. This feeling of separation can serve as the basis for subsequent steps on the path, but in itself, it does not provide much lasting satisfaction. Gradually, the anguish of separation from God moves you on to the next step. The desire dwells in you to gain the direct personal experience and vision of God. You feel, I want to see you, dear Lord. How can I experience you directly? But you find that it does not happen so easily just by wishing for it. You must deeply pine and yearn for this vision, and you must constantly aspire to see Him. Whatever form or aspect of God you have come to love in your devotion, you must know, yearn for it with all your heart, and wish to see it directly. If your yearning is sincere, then after some time He will make Himself known to you in a most personal way and give you this sort for vision of Himself. Here is a small story to illustrate this. The cowherd boy. There was a poor cowherd boy who had a great deal of faith and an intense yearning to see God. One day in the village where this boy lived, a preacher came to deliver some spiritual discourses. The preacher would gather together an audience and sing the glories and exploit of the Lord. It was not possible for this cow herd boy to give up his work and come to all the meetings because all day long he had to attend to his cows. But in the evening he would bring the animals into a sheltered place and then go to hear the preacher give this his talk. The cowherd boy could listen with great earnestness and care to all that was being said. The preacher was a follower of Lord Vishnu, and so he related the characteristic features of God in the form of Vishnu, or Narayana as he is also called. In the course of the discourse, the preacher repeatedly described the traditional image of the Lord as one who was dark complexioned, who wore a white mark on his forehead and rode on a white eagle. The preacher also explained that Lord Vishnu was always prepared to go to the rescue of those who sought shelter in him, and that he would accept as an offering anything that was given to him with full faith and love. As the preacher repeatedly described these characteristics of the Lord, they made an indelible impression on the heart of the boy. The preacher also said that God is a great lover of music and that he could be won by directing one's prayers to him in songs sung most reverently for the heart. Well, this cowherd boy used to carry some food with him for his noontime lunch. Daily he will offer this food to God with all sincerity and devotion, praying to the Lord to partake of it. He began his prayers by singing this song. O loving Lord, you ride on a white eagle, so I have been told, come, please come to me and accept this food. The boy went on praying like this to the Lord for one whole week continuously. He never touched his food because it was not shared by the Lord. By the end of the week, he became extremely weak. Anguished yearning for the Lord's presence, besides his weakened physical condition, he was also suffering from extreme anguish because he felt that he was not singing properly and therefore the Lord did not respond. He was sure that it was because of his own shortcomings in his songs that the Lord did not come to partake of his food. And so, with great determination and devotion, he continued to practice his singing, thinking that in the end he would surely win the grace of Lord. In his weakened condition, he reached the forest. He was feeling extremely exhausted, but he was determined not to eat unless his offering was accepted by the Lord. Now his prayerful song poured out of him in a most melodious and sacred way. The boy just kept on singing and singing all the time, imploring the Lord to come down and accept the food and drink that he was offering with so much yearning. When there was perfect harmony in the feeling, in the tune, and in the content of the song, the Lord descended. How did he appear before that cowherd boy? He came as a boy of the same age, wearing the simple austeric cloth of sadhu, a mendicant holy man. The young cowherd asked the boy he saw standing before him, "Please, dear friend, may I know who you are? Are you a traveler passing through this forest?" The holy boy answered, "I am the Lord. I am Narayana. You prayed to see me, and so I have come to give you a vision of myself." Remembering that the Lord liked the sweet sound of music, the cowherd boy continued his questioning in the form of a most melodious song. "But you don't conform to the description given of the Lord, who is a dark complexion, who wears a white mark of on his forehead, and who rides a white eagle." The preacher said, "That is how we can know the Lord. But it does not seem to be true. Oh, dear one, if you are really the blessed Lord, please resolve my doubt and let me see you in your true form." The vision of the Lord. The boy had heard a description of the Lord. Now he wanted to see and experience him directly, exactly as he had heard him described and come to believe in him. But God doesn't have any specific name or form. He has a thousand eyes, a thousand ears, a thousand hands, and a thousand feet. Yet, in order to please and satisfy his devotees who are aspiring to see him, he takes on the particular form which has been earnestly prayed for. To satisfy this cowherd boy, the Lord revealed himself by taking on the lustrous form of Vishnu and accepted the food and drink so lovingly offered by the boy. This is the second stage when one yearns for the vision of the Lord. Even when that vision comes, it will still not be true form of God, but the one chosen through the prayers of the devotee. God loves sincere, heartfelt feelings, and therefore, in keeping with the feeling of his devotee, he will give his vision in the form which pleasures the devotee most. After the Lord left, the boy thought to himself, "First I heard a description of him, and then I prayed for a vision of him. Now he has come down and I have seen him directly. But how can I reach him and be ever with him? By merely knowing that God exists, a devotee will not be satisfied, nor does he get full satisfaction by just having a vision of the Lord. Having had the vision, he yearns to be fully merged with him. It is only then that the devotee will be in unending bliss. In the case of this boy, the Lord had given a vision of himself and then disappeared. But from that moment on, the boy kept the picture of the Lord as he just seen him in the form of Vishnu, continuously imprinted in his heart. With that lovely form in his mind, he now began inquiring and thinking only of how he could reach him and merge with him. This is the third stage, beyond dualism. In the same way, by either listening to learned people or by reading and studying the scriptures, you can get some idea of what God is like. But ultimately, you will not be satisfied and happy with just this. It is still only a stage of dualism, for in this stage, you and God remain separate. Therefore, you will make an attempt to go beyond this stage of dualism to the next step, which is qualified non dualism. This refers to the deep aspiration to see and experience God directly. How can you get a vision of Him? By picturing in your own heart the form of God you heard described and then continuously thinking and contemplating on that form. Whatever you do, whatever you say, whatever you see, and whatever you listen to, you have to become one with that sacred form. The specific form of God you have pictured becomes a thought form in your mind. The thought form should then become saturated with the feeling of devotion so that it becomes a feeling form in your heart. Gradually, this feeling will deepen and strengthen until one day you will have a real vision of the Lord. So, first the Lord is heard of and thought of, then he is sought through intense feeling of devotion and yearning, and finally he reveals himself in form and can be directly experienced. In other words, the thought form turns into a feeling form and which becomes transformed into real experience. That describes the second stage on the path. Not only do you get the personal vision of the Lord whom you have aspired to see, but you also get the chance to converse with Him face to face. After seeing the Lord thus and talking to Him directly, you gain a little more satisfaction. But if you are a true devotee, even this golden opportunity will not give you the full joy you long for. Now you want to reach God and merge with Him. You think, I have heard, I have seen. Now I must reach Him and be one with Him. In the first stage, when through reading and hearing, you come to know that God exists, you feel the God is separate and you are separate. This is the state of dualism. But in the second stage, you see the Lord and get the feeling that you are part of Him. This is the state of qualified non dualism. Finally, you move on to the feeling the Lord and I are one and the same. This is the stage of complete non dualism. Here you think either I must get merged with Him or He must become one with me. Then there is complete unity, becoming one with the Lord. So long as there remains a separate river distant from the ocean, which is its source and its goal, then the river will retain a separate name and have an individual identity. But once the river merges into the ocean, it gets the taste of the ocean, it gets the form of the ocean, and it takes on the name of the ocean. If you want to become one with the Lord, you have to acquire the feelings of the Lord. You have to acquire the form of the Lord and you have to acquire all the sacred characteristics of the Lord. Only then will you be one with Him. You have to feel that all the attributes of the Lord must manifest themselves in you. Affirm to yourself the broad mindedness of the Lord is within me. All the selfless feelings of the Lord are within me. The unbounded love of the Lord is within me. When you faithfully live this conviction, then you eventually attain the realization that you and He are one. Then there is perfect unity. You must continuously strive for this feeling of unity. You must make every effort to gain it. Then you will reach that fulfillment one day. This is the ultimate goal of human life. It is only when you reach that place, the place from which you have originally come, that true fulfillment will be yours. The three stages in secular life. Even in your secular life, you can recognize these progressive stages necessary for reaching a goal. Consider the following example. Suppose you some mangoes have arrived in the marketplace and that mangoes are fruits which you love immensely. There must be one particular type of mango which you especially favor and relish. Now a friend comes to you and informs you that they are selling these particular mangoes that you enjoy so much. The moment you hear this, get a certain amount of satisfaction. You are happy just thinking about these mangoes, even though you have not acquired them and tested them. The moment you get the news, you rush to the bazaar to find out where those mangoes are and whether they are still available. Yes, they are there. Now you get a good look at them. This gives you still more satisfaction. But even then, you are not yet fully happy. So you put some choice mangoes in your bag and pay for them. Then, until you reach home, you go on thinking about these fruits, reflecting on your good fortune to find such nice ones and looking forward to eating them. Why do you spend so much time thinking about them? Because you have an extraordinary liking for these fruits, and your actions in going after them and getting them are proof of this strong love you have for them. You can get a lot of joy when a feeling that you have been experiencing strongly inside you take on a form which you can see externally. In truth, the whatever you see outside of you is always only a reflection of your inner thoughts. When you have a strong enough desire, you will manifest externally what you wish for strong internally. Your desire for the mangoes brought you to the market. Now you have brought them and brought them home. You wash them and nicely and peel them. Then you start eating them with great relish and anticipation. As you consume them, you blissfully enjoy the nectarine juice of these lovely fruits. Soon the juice is no longer something outside of you, but it will have become part of you. With that, you get immense joy. You feel complete bliss, knowing, seeing, and becoming one with the divinity. What is the reason for such great joy? Let us recapitulate the process. First, you came to know that the particular fruit you love had become available in the bazaar. That is knowing. After hearing about it, you did not get discouraged but developed the intense desire to get them and enjoy them. You went to the bazaar with great intensity of desire and yearning to see the fruits there. Finally, you found them and got a good look at those fruits. That is the stage of seeing. After seeing the fruit, you acquired them and ate them. This is the stage of entering into and becoming one with the objective of your desire. Do you have such intense feeling for God? That is the one desire you really should develop. After listening to a number of discourses, after reading many scriptures, after knowing that God exists, and after having spent much time in worshipping Him, you will have to develop a strong yearning to see Him. Otherwise, all your efforts will be in vain. You have to fervently strive, making an all out effort to get a direct vision of the Lord. A student, after having entered a particular grade and spent the year studying the subject at that level, will not get any satisfaction in remaining in that grade for the next year. He will aspire to progress to a higher grade. If a student is in the same class for 2 years, he develops a sense of despair and despondency. Do not, not only does he get discouraged, but he is also put through a lot of ridicule by his fellow students. In the same way, you will be poorer in the eyes of other devotees if you continuously remain in the first stages of dualistic worship without moving on in your spiritual development. Other devotees will say, look at this person. He has been attending so many discourses over a long period of time and he has read all the great scriptures. But what is the use of all that? There does not seem to be any progress in him. This unfortunate process of remaining stuck in the first stage is the characteristic feature of the slothful quality of inertia and laziness. You have to remove this quality and go on from the dualistic state to the next state of internalizing the Lord. In this state, through the continuous contemplation of the divinity inside you, try to gain a direct vision of God in the particular form you choose. With intense desire, you will get that coveted chance to see the Lord, converse with Him, and serve Him, reaching the abiding peace of the immortal self. But even that you should not be satisfied. You should strive to reach the final and highest state. There should be no rest, no peace of mind or contentment until you reach the state of complete mergence with God and the realization of His oneness. These days you are only aspiring to obtain rest for your body and trying to get a little peace of mind. But this is not good. You have to reach the abiding peace of the Atma. This is your true self, the immortal self, the one unique universal self. When you become reunited with it, you become peace itself. Your individual self has to merge with the universal self. Then the long journey is complete and permanent bliss is realized. A river is born from the ocean and ends in the ocean. But how did the river originate? Initially, some of the water of the ocean turned into clouds. Once the ocean water becomes a cloud, there is a separation and duality. Clouds are separate, ocean is separate. The water of the ocean is saltish. After it turns into a cloud, it becomes sweet. But now the water which has become a cloud comes in the form of rain. You can say it is rain of love because this rain water becomes a river and with great enthusiasm rushes to rejoin the ocean. This may be compared to the state wherein a great anguish and aspiration dwells to get nearer and nearer to the final goal. When you are in that state, you yearn with all your heart to reach the native land from which you have become separated. In the case of the water in the form of a river, it is impelled to merge back into the ocean from whence it came. Only then will it have reached its goal. Such is the pure non-dualistic state of total mergence with the source. You are born as a human being and you have lived part of your life as an ordinary human being, but you have chosen to take up the path of spiritual life. You find yourself seeking out the company of spiritually minded people. You find yourself listening to the great scriptural stories describing the sacred characteristics of the Lord. But now you find that this is not enough. You yearn to have a direct vision of the Lord. Even then, you are not satisfied with just that. Merely having had the opportunity to see and talk with the Lord, you still don't find that your happiness lasts. But when you finally get fully merged and united with Him, then you gain the complete fulfillment you have been seeking. Then you are one with the unending peace and bliss that is the Lord. This was the teaching that Krishna imparted to Arjuna on the battlefield. The sacred names of Arjuna in the Gita, Krishna used a number of names to address Arjuna. Even in worldly life, a number of titles and names may be conferred on people. In the Gita, it was the embodiment of divinity, Lord Krishna, who conferred the different names on Arjuna. Krishna told Arjuna, "O Arjuna, you are not a child of mortality, you are the divine divinity itself. You are the son of immortality." In his life, Arjuna found himself in a number of trying circumstances in which he acquitted himself heroically. As a result, he was given various titles to obtain his bow, which was a sacred weapon. He performed severe penance and faced a number of difficult problems, but throughout he persisted with a great deal of faith, courage, and conviction. His determination in the face of all obstacles was ultimately rewarded by gaining the grace of Lord Shiva and winning the boy directly from him. In the process of getting this celestial weapon, even the elements of nature went against him, but nothing could deter him from his firm resoluteness, resoluteness and purpose. Because he was able to win the bow, the Lord conferred on him the title, the victor of the bow. From a worldly point of view, Arjuna could also be thought of as the one who was victorious in gaining wealth. There is a story for this. The oldest of the Pandava brothers, Dharmraja, who was the king, decided to undertake a great ceremonial sacrifice performed only by reigning kings. At the time, the Pandavas were opposed by the wicked Kauravas. The treasury of the Pandavas was completely empty. They had no money available at all. In the face of such obstacles, it would have been nearly impossible to proceed with such a grand ceremony. Still, Dharmaraja insisted on going ahead with the ceremonial sacrifice. He said to Arjuna, "Brother, this occasion will require a very heavy expenditure of funds. We will need a great deal of wealth. How might we raise this money?" Arjuna replied, "Dharamraja, why worry about money when we have with us the wish fulfilling tree in the form of Krishna? Why should we be afraid? Once Krishna blesses us, we will be able to get any amount of money. Arjuna went around to the different kings ruling over the surrounding areas to inform them of Dharmaraja's wish to hold the great sacrifice. As soon as these kings heard that Dharmaraja was planning to perform the ceremony, they offered to support Dharmaraja with their own treasuries, and so Arjuna brought back wealth in such huge quantities that it took dozens of elephants to carry it. There were great heaps of gold, silver, and jewels. Krishna, who had prompted all this, came and acted as if he did not know anything. He asked Dharmaraja, "Wherever did you get so much wealth? Where did it all come from?" Dharmaraja, out of ignorance and fraternal pride, replied, "It is because of my brother Arjuna that I got all this." From that day on, Krishna addressed Arjuna as the conqueror of wealth. In this way, concealing his own role and announcing to the world that it was Arjuna who was able to gather so much wealth. There were many other names given to Arjuna, such as Son of the Earth. These names were not intended for Arjuna alone. As you hear these various names, you can start applying them to yourself. Each contains a deeper meaning and shows how the Lord showers His grace on His devotees. Make them part of you. Fully live them by strive to understand their deeper meaning and by putting them into practice in your daily life. Restraining the tongue in both food and speech. One of the most important disciplines necessary for coming into union with God is control of the tongue. This must be exercised both in the area of food and in the area of speech. Without control of the tongue, it is impossible to follow the path of devotion and become one with God. Embodiments of love. Together with most animals and birds, human beings have five sense organs. These sense organs must be used extremely carefully, always being aware of their capabilities and limitations. You must exercise the same control over them as you do in controlling some of the powerful energies and tools that are used in daily life. For example, fire, when used with care and intelligence, can serve you in many useful ways, but when it is out of control, it can be very harmful. Or take a knife or electricity. If you know the proper way to use them, they will be beneficial. Otherwise, they can be quite dangerous. It all depends on the care you take and how well you use your intelligence. The spiritual teaching have laid great emphasis on knowing the proper use of the sense organs and applying that understanding to your day-to-day life. The dual power of the tongue. Each sense organ given to human beings has one particular use, but the tongue is endowed with dual power. It has both the power of speech and power of taste. In the Gita, the Lord cautions you to be very careful in using your tongue. He praises the devotee who has attained complete control over the tongue, for such a one will soon develop a pure and steady heart and feel the constant presence of the Lord. To gain such control, devotees have been practicing number of special disciplines such as observing silence, controlling their diet, or maintaining a complete fast. Fasting prompts health for the physical body. In the mental realm, it gives joy and bliss. Unlimited and unregulated food is very harmful for devotees. Indulging indiscriminately in unwholesome foods is like to lead the devotee into torpidity of inertia. To think that you can go on wantonly indulging yourself in food while at the same time trying to please God and enjoy the nearness of God. It's extremely foolish. These two, indulging in food and gaining the nearness of God, are not compatible. Therefore, right from the beginning, you must make a determined effort to keep the tongue under control. Once you gain mastery over the tongue, the other sense organ will automatically come under control. Control of the tongue. 2 days devotees have imposed on themselves all sorts and rule and regulation in order to live a disciplined spiritual life. Unfortunately, these have not been effective in gaining control over the tongue. Truly speaking, it is not necessary to make such strenuous efforts to control the various sense organs. If the tongue is properly controlled, all the other sense organs will come in line with by themselves. Because people have not been able to gain control over the tongue, they are afflicted with numerous doubts, emotional turmoil, contradictions, and confusion. Control of the tongue refers not only to food but also to speech. You must recognize that there is nothing more powerful than the power of words. For this reason, you must keep your talk strictly under control. In life, you can observe that even for a little thing, a number of sacrifices have to be made. You cannot get anything without paying for it. You are prepared to sacrifice even your own life to obtain some small, petty, useful things. But you are not seeking that which is exceedingly important, that which includes all other things and is the very basis of everything worthwhile. That greatest of all treasure is the immortal self. Only when you give up one thing can you get another in its place. Should you not then give up everything else for the sake of gaining this most important and most valuable of all possessions? Should you not sacrifice everything for the sake of reaching your highest self? In the marketplace, if you want some vegetables, you will have to give some money in the exchange without offering to pay and thereby sacrificing some of your money. You will not be able to get those vegetables. By giving up one thing, you can then acquire another. In the same way, if you want to acquire virtues, you will have to give up your bad qualities. Only by sacrificing your likes and dislikes can you obtain equal mindedness. Only by sacrificing your bad qualities can you attain the noble qualities. Only by giving up your bad thoughts, bad habits, and bad behavior can you possibly achieve good thoughts, good habits, and good behavior. Many sages have described how the tongue always longs to enjoy good things and how everything will be easy once you can gain control over it. The principal way of exercising this control is by observing silence. Silence does not merely refer to restraint of the tongue. Not only should you exercise silence in speech, but you should also be silent in thoughts. Your mind should remain free of all thoughts. That is true silence. Develop a discriminating mind. If you want to gain control over the food that you take in, you should not go on feeding the tongue whatever it desires. You have to develop discrimination in every activity of life. You have to apply your discriminating faculties to determine if what you are doing will benefit your spiritually. In the area of food, you have to explore and find out whether the food you take in is pure, or if it inflames the senses and passions, or if it is of a dull, unhealthy quality that produces a sleepy or slothful reaction. According to the Gita, maintaining control over the tongue by taking in pure food is limited quantity is absolutely essential for the devotee. Use your powers of discrimination with ev- every item of food and ask the question, is this food pure or will it disturb or lower my consciousness? If you were to examine every item of food you use in this way and take food in judiciously, you would always remain equal minded. You would not be affected by censor or praise. But if you were to indulge in food without discrimination, without trying to find out whether it was desirable or not, paying attention only to satisfying your hunger and catering to your taste buds, you would not be able to control your attachments and feelings. You would sink down into the weakness. If someone were to make adverse comments about you, you would soon conclude that the whole world was against you and you would feel depressed. The moment you were criticized or blamed by anyone, your happiness would go. You would become grief stricken and regard all of life as meaningless. On the other hand, if anyone were to praise you and appreciate you, you would start bloating up with ego and pride. It would be practically impossible to hold you down. What the reason for such instability? The single most important reason for this weakness is the type of food you take in. All these adverse feelings come about because of your lack of control and discrimination in the area of food. The Gita has emphasized the need for exercising extreme care in selecting the food you eat. You must constantly keep in mind the importance of of pure food for helping you to maintain equanimity in all situations so that you become neither elated when praise is showered nor depressed when criticism is heaped upon. Purity of the food, the cooking vessels, and the cook. The Gita has also declared that there should be purity of the vessels and utensils used in cooking and purity of the cooking process itself. The vessels used must be absolutely clean. Purity refers not only to physical cleanliness but also to the way in which the implements and the articles of food have been acquired. You have to see whether these things have been acquired by proper means and honest work or whether they have come through dishonest means. Articles which are acquired by improper means and used for cooking food will not only generate bad thoughts but will lead you down the wrong path. The next step is to acquire into the purity of the cooking process itself by ascertaining the thoughts and feelings of the person who is cooking the food. There are three things that have been mentioned that must be carefully looked into the and controlled. Normally, you pay attention only to the purity of the vessels and not the other two, namely the purity of the person cooking and the purity of the food itself. You do not know the feelings in the mind of the cook, and you do not know if the shopkeeper has acquired the articles you buy in the market by proper or improper means. Therefore, just before taking your food, you should pray and offer the entire meal to God in order to cleanse and purify it. This prayer, which is offered before food, is not for the benefit of God but for your own benefit. It will purify your food by evoking God's blessings. Before eating, you can say your own sincere prayer from your heart, asking God to purify and bless the food. Or you can use formal prayers such as the verses from Gita that are traditionally used before food. These are the 24th verses from the 4th chapter and the 14th verse from the 15th chapter, which are particularly efficacious. The blessing offering food to God. In Sanskrit, the Gita verses used before food are Brahm Arpanam, Brahm Havir, Brahmajam, Brahmanahutam, Brahmevantena Gantavyam, Brahmakarma Samadhinaha, Aham Vaisnanara Bhutava, Prananinam Deha Misritaha, Pranapana Sama Yuktaha, Pachaha Annam Chaturvidham, which means the offering is to God, the act of offering is God, offered by God in the sacred fire which is God. He alone attains good. He, al- he alone attains God, who in all his actions is fully absorbed in God. I am the all pervading cosmic energy lodged in the bodies of living beings, unite with their ingoing and outgoing life breaths. I consume all the various foods. This prayer before eating removes all the defects and flaws in the vessels and in the articles of food, as well as removing any negative influence acquired during the cooking process. Before offering the prayer, the food is merely food, but once you offer it to the Lord, it becomes consecrated food. The role of the tongue in speech. The second aspect of the tongue is speech. As has already been mentioned, speech has its own powerful impact on the mind and the entire mental process. It has a tremendous power. It can perplex your mind, it can break your heart, it can even kill you. It can also give life and encouragement and help you to reach your divine goal. These are two opposite and contradictory results, both affected by the spoken word. By the use of appropriate words, it is possible to transform the entire mind of an individual. Unfortunately, many people do not believe this. They raise objections like how is it possible to transform the mind through merely words? What experiments have been conducted to prove that there is this power in the faculty of speech? Words are only gross sounds heard through the ear, or else they think the mind is a very subtle thing. How can mere sounds transform something that is so subtle and fine? It is not possible. In this way, They will argue that it is impossible to bring about a mental transformation through words. There is a small story to illustrate this attitude. The story of the officer and the preceptor. There was once a government officer who did not believe in the great power of words to transform minds, particularly when it came to spiritual teaching. He happened to be the education secretary for a district, and included among the schools he had under his auspices were some religious institutions. One day he visited one of these schools where a preceptor was teaching the Holy Scripture to a number of young students. This spiritual teacher was expounding on some very profound concepts. Sitting there listening to this, the officer developed a headache. Finally, he told the teacher, "My dear fellow, these are small children. There is no need to burden them unnecessarily with such lectures. This will be completely useless to them. Such scriptural truths and deep philosophical concepts cannot possibly grasped and understood by such small children." The teacher replied that only when children are at such a tender and impressionable age can they be led on to the proper path. Being taught these noble truths from the very beginning, he felt would clear their hearts of doubt and put them on the right track in life. The officer said, "I do not believe in all these words. How can mere words transform the mind? I do not think this will ever be possible." The teacher tried to convince him through various explanations and arguments, but the officer would not listen and allow any of the teacher's wisdom to penetrate into him. It was a case of a closed mind. Too much authority often results in cynicism and exaggerated sense of self-importance. Cleverness follows, and in a short time all the virtues disappear and the reason becomes impaired. When the teacher realized that no matter how hard he tried, it was impossible to explain his point of view to this officer, he decided to prove his point by a practical lesson that the officer was sure to understand. He asked the youngest of the students to get up and told this small boy, "Child, you go and physically throw this officer out of the room. Do it immediately." The moment he heard these words, the officer got very angry. He started shouting at the teacher, "Who do you think you are? I am a government officer. I am the education secretary of this district, and you are asking a small child to send me out. How dare you do this?" The teacher then told the officer, "Well, sir, I did not beat you or hit you or even touch you. I did not do anything to you. Just by merely hearing some words, you seem to be getting very upset. What could be the reason for your becoming so angry? It is because of these few words I used, is not it?" This is how the teacher demonstrated to him that words can be very powerful. They have an enormous capability for doing great harm or great good, according to the way they are used. After this personal lesson, the officer left, but how much wiser and humbled by his experience. The power of words. In the scriptures, you will find also statements that point out how words are extremely powerful and can destroy the world itself. There it is said that if you were to cut a tree, it could still sprout. Or if a piece of iron were broken into, a blacksmith could make the two pieces come together again by heating and pounding them until they were one. But if you were to break a heart by venomous words, it would not be possible to ever make it whole again. Words can cause endless troubles, and they can also give boundless joy. Therefore, you should be most careful that the words you use do not hurt or give pain to others. If you were to physically slip and fall, there must be some small injury that could cause you some inconvenience for a while. But would not be any grave consequences resulting from this in the long term. There might only have been a small wound which you can get easily dressed and which would soon heal. But if your tongue were to slip and you were to hurt the mind or the heart of another person with harsh words, it would create a wound in that person which could not be cured by any doctor in the world. Therefore, you should never use words which are likely to hurt another's feelings. One day, the words which you have used will come back to you. So always use sweet and good words. It has been said that the tongue relishes sweet things. You can talk to it and say, "Oh, tongue, you like sweet things so much. Why don't you linger on the sweet name of the Lord? Oh, tongue, you know what true sacrifice means. You are the very embodiment of sacrifice. Use yourself only for singing the name of the Lord. Sing of God and become sacred and holy thereby. Sacrifice and forbearance. Now, why do we say that the tongue knows the true meaning of sacrifice and is absolutely selfless? Well, this is really that you experience every day. For example, when you give some sweet things to the tongue, it tastes them, and as soon as it finds out that they are delightfully sweet, it says to itself, "Oh, let me pass these lovely sweet things on to the stomach so that it can also enjoy the delight." But if what is tasted is not pleasant, if, for example, it is something that is bitter, then the tongue will not pass this on to the stomach but will immediately spit the offensive substance out of the mouth to save the stomach from grief. Good or bad, sweet or bitter, the tongue does not try to keep anything just for itself and only for its own enjoyment. It lives selflessly and with honor, knowing its own limits very well. For any number of years, it is content to remain shut up and inside the mouth. Does it come outside even once? No. Whatever work it does uncomplainingly inside the mouth. There is still another important feature of the tongue. It has extraordinary forbearance. Whatever are its difficulties and problems and whatever troubles and others give it, it remains focused within itself, never exceeding its own limits and always observing forbearance. It lives in the midst of exceedingly harmful companions, namely very sharp and powerful teeth. With a great deal of skill, it manages not to be beaten or hurt by these aggressive fellow residents that share its tight quarters. With unusual skill and forbearance, it has been existing very well with such dreadful neighbors without even once coming to any harm. In this way, the tongue can teach a number of very important lessons which can be quite useful to you. For instance, it teaches you that you can live in the midst of people who are very difficult to live with. With a lot of care, forbearance, and skill, you should be able to enjoy a happy life despite such trying circumstances. But in today's world, there will be very few who follow such good example. For most individuals, once they come in touch with bad people, they will tend to become bad. All the good fellows and good quality, the good thoughts and the good behavior disappear in a moment and they lose all their merits and virtues. In order that you do not suffer such bad consequences, it is necessary that you gain complete control over your tongue. Talk waste spiritual energy. Baba quite often tells the students, "Dear students, you should not talk too much. The divine energy which is in you will get wasted in the process. By engaging in too much talk, your memory power will be reduced and weakness will develop in in your body. Premature old age will be final result. Besides that, you will also get a bad name. Now consider that you have a radio. You may switch it on to hear a news broadcast, but then you leave the room and forget to switch it off. The radio just continues to play without purpose and uses up costly energy. Your body can be compared to that radio, and the intellect may be thought of as the switch that is has turned it on but failed to turn it off again. In this comparison, your mind will be the useless sound coming from forth in the form of words and talk ceaselessly, babbling only. The sacred divine energy in you will get wasted by this kind of endless talk. Right from dawn, you get up till dusk. When you go to bed, you go on talking. If not loudly, then within yourself. The volume might be turned down, but nevertheless, the talk will be going on all the time. The radio inside you just keeping on playing non-stop and the valuable Spiritual energy that is within you gets wasted, just as electricity is consumed in the case of the radio. Whether it is playing loudly or softly, the energy just drains away. The most common cause of premature old age and senility is this talk and more talk and still more talk. All this talk is not good. You have to observe silence. From birth, you have not developed the habit of inner silence. You have to develop it now. Actually, the two functions of the tongue are closely related. Too much talk leads to unnatural hunger. When the talker feels more hunger, he will, of course, take more food. Because of this excess food, feelings will arise which will express themselves in still more talk. In this process, controlling the senses become an almost impossible task. If you were to give a horse very concentrated food and then confine it to tie up, it would become very nervous and upset and would not be able to keep quiet. After you feed a horse, it is necessary to exercise it also in the same way. If you take in rich food without working hard and taking some exercise, you will become nervous and restless, and you will also develop egoistic feelings of selfishness and pride. Proper exercise will strengthen your health, and proper food taken in moderation will control the negative tendencies. One of the main purposes of spiritual practice is to see it that the food you take in will be used in the service of society. You must be firmly resolved to always do good in the face of some adversity. You should not flicker like a flame in the wind. You must have strong self-confidence. Self-confidence. Consider a tiny bird which has come and landed on a branch where it continues to sit for some time afterwards. Now, suppose a wind comes up and the branch starts to move, swaying back and forth. The little bird will not get frightened by this movement of the branch. Why? Because it does not depend entirely on the branch for its sport. It depends on its wings, and so it has strong self-confidence that no amount of movement of the branch would disturb it. Even if the branch were to break, this would not threaten it or cause it to fall. But today's man gets easily frightened by the smallest difficulties in day-to-day life. He does not have the self-confidence which even a little bird has. What is the reason for this? The reason is too much food. He takes in food which is full of dross and which in turn generates feelings that are saturated with the quality of rajas, excessive nervous energy and activity, which promotes apprehension and anger. As a result, he has no chance to experience his true nature, which is even minded and pure. The youth of today have many doubts. They see animals and birds relating to one another in all kinds of ways, enjoying a great deal of freedom. The youth wonder why they should not have the same freedom and independence that the animals enjoy. The proper answer to this question is yes, you are also entitled to freedom, but it is the freedom appropriate to a human being, not that of an animal. Animal enjoy the freedom which is natural to animals. You should enjoy human freedom, the freedom that is natural to human beings. L- Live as a true human being, develop the qualities appropriate to a human being. Calling yourself a human but trying to enjoy the freedom of an animal will not get you far. The human characteristics are sacrifice, love, compassion, generosity, sympathy, non-violence, and other such noble qualities. Do not develop the qualities associated with an animal, and even worse than that, do not succumb to qualities much lower than an animal, namely the qualities of a demon, such as selfishness, anger, hatred, lust, jealousy, and the like. These demonic qualities have no place in human beings. If a selfishness, pride, and jealousy, in particular, you should never allow selfishness, pride, and jealousy to take up residence within you. These three are the worst of the bad traits that infest man. If you wish to acquire only good qualities, the human qualities instead of animal or demonic quality, then you will have to acquire control of the tongue in both the areas of speech and food. This is the royal road for human being. The path of devotion requires that you use the tongue properly, which means that you use food properly and use words properly. Especially in this dark age of materialism and unrighteousness, the tongue can get easily sanctified by repeating the holy name. Instead of wasting your precious divine energy and your precious time in idle talk, let the tongue constantly sing the praises of God and repeat his name. Sing the name of the Lord. That is the proper way to spend your life. Use every moment of the day to saturate yourself with the glory and the holiness of his presence. You can reach God through love alone. The Lord declared in the Gita, when you constantly think of me with love, I will bless you with the gift of spiritual discrimination. This will lead you to permanent union with me. I promise this to you. Embodiment of love. The buddhi is the discriminating faculty through which you can separate that which is real from that which is unreal, that which is permanent from that which is changing. This power of spiritual discernment become available to only to people who have developed sacred devotion and are filled with love for God. Devotion is the royal road to attaining the highest wisdom. In truth, it is the only path leading to self knowledge. Devotion evokes the grace of God. The Lord proclaimed in the 12th chapter of the Gita, the one who is devoted to me is very dear to me. Devotion. What is devotion? It is the steady flow of love towards God. When your love flows towards individuals or towards transient